White of Alan White Custom Surfboards. I build my boards down here at Foam Shaper Surf Studio in Cocoa Beach on Minuteman Causeway. I've been shaping surfboards since 1975, and that equates to well into the 10,000 board range. Today I've been asked to discuss a little bit about my approach to how I address setting up and planing the rails on my boards. I like to set my boards up where I pretty much finish the bottom. So I plane the bottom, I sand in the contours with machines, and then I come in and start hand sanding. I use a specific tool that gets me to this stage, and then I adjust from there according to the board I'm building. And then I'll sand this board out to the first screen, and then I'll flip the board over, and then we'll address the top of the rail. I break my manifest and approach to how we cut this rail up in a couple of different stages. You'll see that I stage the cuts in bands, and I try to save the bands through the whole thing until the rail turns into a curve. So I'll divide, 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 divide. We'll get into that a little bit more shortly. What we'll do right now is I'll take and I'll sand the bottom of this board. I'll get it prepared to start to band the rail with the planer. So one rule of thumb I always use for all of you guys just getting into shaping is I always take the wood first. If you pull the wood down first and you stay with that, you'll never end up chasing stringers to get them flat, okay? Stringers down. Always blow out the hard particle, make sure it's not, you don't get any of that between the foam and the sandpaper. So what we're going to do first is we're going to finish this bevel out, the one I showed you a minute ago. You take this base short bevel I got, we finish it to the nose. Basically what this bevel's doing is it's setting up the tuck for the bottom edge. This type of surfboard right here doesn't have a ton of tuck. It's got a pretty slight tuck. This is the kind of surfboard that you're trying to build to generate speed. So I have pretty much a full down rail. What I mean by a down rail is that this rail comes from the top almost entirely. So now that I've generally tucked that, now I'm checking it to make sure that the tuck is the same from side to side. You can see here too that I'm maintaining the band structure, because as long as I've got this band structure, at a pretty quick glance I can look at this thing and tell you where I need to, you know, touch it up or sand a little to get it right. We're pretty close to where I want to be as far as how that should feel. So we're going to come in here next. We're going to sand in with a finer grit. At this point, for the bottom, we're making a finer finish. The finer this finish is, the less resin it takes when you're glassing it. That helps to keep the board lighter. It helps to maintain even color, even in airbrush or resin. I like to sand in the ends, so I like to kind of get the ends in place and then sand the middle and fair them in to the end. Sharing with you my approach, and I'm sure that anybody that picks anything up from this, they'll at least take away from this that Every shaper, including myself, modifies all the time about how they approach shaping a surfboard. As you see, I like to sort of start from the same end and approach the other end. I try to do it uniform and do it the same. That keeps me from getting too random, getting lost. There's more work to be done with this rail. I'm just nibbling at it, getting it a little closer. So there'll be another screen, so I'll go ahead and block that stringer one more time. You can't go against the grain. This is a piece of wood that's been cut in this shape for the rocker. So the grain's actually going through this stringer here. So if I come into it, I'm gonna run into the grain, just tear up a bunch of strings. So that's why I start in the middle and go to the tail, and in the middle and go to the nose. All right, so the bottom's roughed in. Pick it out, give it a little feel test. You got an idea, you're pretty close. Pretty close to where I want to be as far in terms of the bottom. Now the deck is still quite a rough shape, and you'll see me clean those problems up as I go along. A little thing about my planer so that you understand what I'm doing. I'm using this Hitachi. It's a pretty good planer. I've used them all. There's two main modifications that I do with this planer. And one is this little device. It's just made out of a PVC pipe. But what it allows me to adjust while you're on the fly. So with that ball up here, it gets my hand up on the top of the planer. I'm kind of swinging free. So by putting this shaft on that, and I drop down the purchase on that, and now my hand is on the surface of what I'm planing. And it gives me a lot of stability and control with the planer. So I always reset the blades, and when I do so, I set this thing up so 0 is truly 0. So I can go up and down this board at 0 and it's not cutting. I always make it a habit to sight the deck as far as if it's level or not. This deck's a little high here. I'll go and level it a little bit. I'm going to take the lowest side because you can't put foam on. So wherever the lowest side is where I'll start, and then I'll go to the thicker side and I'll go to where I went on the lower side. Is I'll do 2 bands at a time, and as I told you before, I'll be dividing the band, and so you see a much fatter band here than you see on the bottom. That's because we're getting into the apex, and that's going to be a much tighter curve. This will be a longer curve, and so this band is wider obviously, and we'll be dividing this down. As I'm planing in a perpendicular manner, but I'm looking at the size of this last little square right here. I'm trying to get that right where I want it because this will be the turn of the rail. So that's what I'm doing. Now the next band, when I'm looking at that, I'm just bringing that down and I'm looking at the bottom and trying to keep the same angle as I had over there. And I'm bringing that down because that's going to be the top of the turn. And that's what's in my mind, the bottom of these 2 bands right now, okay? I'm taking into account how these, now the lowest side right now is this side here. So I'm going to take this first. They're basically there. I mean, There's very little work left to be done. This is where you finally have succumbed to the band effect and you're looking for smooth. You're close enough now that you no longer need the bands. Use a lot of photographic memory when you're doing this a little bit from side to side. You kind of got to take a mental note of where you are on the other side. And the more boards you do, the better you get at it. See, I like to get this rail in pretty almost there before I hand sand that deck, because that way I can just hand sand the deck into that finished rail. So this is a pat it. This is pretty aggressive screen. It's too aggressive for the finished product. And basically, we're here. Once again, we're going to get into the fine tuning of the scratches. Notice once again I'm going down the hill, not up the hill. I like to use this pad as we get finer. It's got a little flex, and it's nice just to finish out the tops of these rails. And once again, the same pattern you've seen before. Get that thing dialed all in right there. And again, you've seen it before. Final hit on the bottom. And then final rail screen. Just dial the ends in just a tad bit. And there you have it. There's your 5/4 squirt. A little thicker, beefier style board, a little beefed up rail. Slight V in the tail. And concave throughout. So you can see. Thanks for watching. And a last thank you to Fiberglass Florida for helping support the surf industry with some of the best surfboard materials that can be found and giving us a chance to build some of the best surfboards in the world.